Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about how IIT Guwahati made a PhD scholar take a pledge that he would not take part in any protest or agitation. We will also take a quick look at Kerala reporting its first Zika virus case. But first, we talk about the cabinet reshuffle by the current PM Modi-led government. On Wednesday, the government saw the biggest ever expansion of the Council of Ministers, and the rejig came with a lot of surprises. Almost 50% council members were new, and 6 cabinet ministers were shown the door. Now, in yesterday's episode, we took a quick look at the latest cabinet appointments and discussed the significance of the new governor appointments and transfers. However, in this episode, we speak to Indian Express's bureau chief Ravish Tiwari about the biggest takeaways from the reshuffle, what the government is trying to signal through it, and what we should make of some of the surprise exits of cabinet ministers. Ravish, on Wednesday, we saw the PM Modi-led government make some major changes to the Council of Ministers. This was the biggest one they have done since 2014. Almost 50% council ministers were new. What were some of the biggest changes that stood out for you in this rejig?
So the one thing is that the context of the reshuffle. This is the government which came with an enhanced mandate in 2019, but it has been buffeted by a lot of political noise for last 2.5 years almost. Whether it was CAA protests or farm protests or even the riots in Delhi, one of the worst riots since 1984, anti-Sikh riots. All kind of things has happened in last 2 years, and which did not give a sense of stability or a smooth run for a government which had returned with an enhanced majority. And the COVID pandemic further added to the confusion in the common public about the capability and ability of the government. So with the second wave now abating, there was an opportunity window for the Prime Minister to just reset and start a fresh beginning. And that's what he tried to do, it appears, from the way he has removed some ministers and the kind of people he has brought in the system. The biggest thing was the people, those who have been divested of responsibilities. So at least 6 cabinet ministers and 1 minister of state with an independent charge have been divested. And they are crucial ministries. Health, which was under spotlight because of the handling of the second wave, minister has been discharged. Education minister, IT minister, labor minister, pharmaceutical chemicals fertilizer minister, and social justice minister was discharged, divested of their portfolios. So the biggest thing was that I have to make a fresh beginning. So I am setting aside people whom I think I need to give a fresh pair of legs, as you say in football commentary. So a fresh pair of hands he needed to bring in these sectors to censor, restart these sectors. So that was the biggest news.
Right. And talking about this a bit more, you mentioned Harsh Vardhan, the now former Minister of Health. He made an exit this time. And his exit is being seen as sort of an admission by the government that it messed up the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Is that how we should see his exit?
Yeah, that can easily be interpreted. I mean, there is no way that anybody can say that India could not have done better in handling the second wave. Definitely, India could have done better. And the responsibility lied with the central government on many of the issues where it required interstate cooperation. And the capacities which was required for oxygen or medicine that individual states could not have tackled. And there lied this central government's responsibility. So there was, and the shortages that were faced for those 2 months, April and May, at the peak of the second wave, clearly central government was under a spot. And everybody was looking for at least why not the government is communicating. The government carried its course, but now when the cabinet reshuffle happened, it signaled, it's a veiled admission in a way that I am divesting the health minister of his responsibility. To some extent, the health minister can say that a lot of these decisions were being made at the PMO, but then administrative responsibility lies with the health minister, and divesting him was a veiled admission that can always be interpreted in that fashion.
Right. And, the other big exit was that of Ravi Shankar Prasad, who had been at the forefront of this tussle between the government and the IT companies like Facebook and Twitter. In place of him, we now have a former IAS officer and Rajya Sabha MP, Ashwini Vaishnaw. What is supposed to be the reasoning there?
I know there are still people trying to figure out, we are trying to figure out what exactly caused the exit of the IT minister, because the battle picked up with the tech giants or social media companies was entire government's brief. So it was not that it was a suo moto action taken by the IT minister. The entire government, even the ruling party, was in confrontation with the social media platform. So whether that issue could not get resolved in a timely fashion or it remained festered for such long despite being such a big market for that social media platform could have been one factor, that we should not let this issue fester for so long. We have leverage enough to settle the issue amicably to the mutual interest. And that did not happen. Obviously, the issue is still festering. It is in the courts, it is in public domain, and there is still tussle going on between the government and the platform. So why was it not resolved? And it may have caused the exit of the minister, but we can't say conclusively that that was the only factor that led to his exit.
And in this regard, do we also find the exit of Prakash Javadekar, who'd been the information and broadcasting minister, do we find his exit puzzling as well? Like, are there any reasons that we can assess for this?
Again, the common explanation, there is no, because it's a, who becomes a ministry is a privilege that only Prime Minister commands. So nobody has the direct information why he was asked to exit from the government. But the one logical explanation that is doing the rounds in the ruling BJP is that the last 2 years, the party has been at the back foot and always trying to be defensive on its various decisions made. And in particularly the poor optics that were generated over the migrant crisis during the first wave of pandemic, and now again during the second wave of the pandemic, the entire response came under severe scrutiny and criticism of the media and even public at large. So as a government chief, government spokesperson, the INB minister was supposed to try to airbrush many of the narratives, which he could not do. That explanation that's doing the rounds within the ruling party, that may be held against him. But the one thing is sure that he was not handling the migrants problem per se. He was not responsible for responding to the COVID second wave. So those were not his direct responsibilities. The only thing, he could have presented the government's version and the efforts in a much more presentable way. That could be probably held against him. But then everybody will agree that the response fell well short of what was desired.
And the other thing that we have seen this time is the rise of bureaucrats, the induction of bureaucrats in the Council of Ministers. So could you talk about that and the possible reasons that the government has chosen to do so?
So the one surprising thing in this reshuffle is the reliance or the weight assigned to former bureaucrats and the kind of portfolios assigned to them. Particularly so, knowing that how Prime Minister in his first term gave due weightage to people, those who have risen through the party ranks and gone through the grind of political mobilization and assigned them heavier responsibilities. But in this government, at least you can find 5 ministers who have not worked with the political work in their growing up years. So whether it's the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, whether it's Steel Minister RCP Singh, whether it's Power Minister R.K. Singh, whether Railways Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw, or whether Petroleum Minister Hardeep Puri. I mean, these are 5 of 30 ministers are ex-bureaucrats, and they have never gone through the ideological training that the BJP trains its cadres over the years. So that is a surprising element. And then all of these are very heavier ministries. So power with the R.K. Singh, petroleum and housing with Hardeep Puri, steel with the RCP Singh. There he can take an excuse that he's from JDU, the alliance partner. But Ashwini Vaishnaw has been given 3 ministries: railways, electronics, and communications. So these are surprising additions. The one explanation that is doing the rounds that we wanted professional hands to steer these ministries, which required a technocratic mindset to deal. So that is a surprising development in this reshuffle.
Ravish, you have also written that it appears that with this reshuffle, the government has realized that there is a political cost to ideological projects like CAA and the abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir, for example. So could you just expand on that a bit and explain how that is reflected in these decisions?
So generally what happens is that formation of the cabinet reshuffle exercises are not only an exercise in governance, they are also an exercise in political management. So the last 2 years has been politically very noisy for the government. So they need to shape up for the future political challenges. So if you look at while the inductions in the cabinet, main cabinet is where you will find professionals or the people, those who have done their dues as a junior ministers now been elevated to cabinet. But the new ministers who have been added in the MOS, most of them have been appears to be done on a political considerations. So either they are representing caste or community or represent a different regional, sub-regional representation demands of the big states. So as to just shape up the party for the future political challenges. So you are trying to accumulate political actors through ministers of state appointments in different parts of the country. In particular, the larger states, UP, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, and West Bengal have seen the largest number of new faces inducted. And they are not that only one caste. Even these states, the ministers have been chosen from different social backgrounds, from different regions of those states. So as to say that we have well represented these states for the future political challenges. UP in particular is going to polls early next year. So they have added 3 OBCs, 3 Dalits, and 1 Brahmin reshuffle yesterday.
And apart from this, were there any other patterns or any other takeaways for you in this reshuffle?
The pattern is that it is trying to groom a new set of future leaders. So if you look at 7 ministers have been upgraded to cabinet, they served as ministers of state in the last 2 years. So the cabinet reshuffle has promoted several of the ministers who are younger. So whether it's Kiran Rijiju, Anurag Thakur, these people, or G. Kishan Reddy, these leaders have been promoted saying that I'm trying to groom it for their age or from the regions they are representing. So that is a decision consciously made. Likewise, the new faces which have been added as ministers of state this time could be taken as a attempt by the BJP and the prime minister to groom them as future leaders for their respective regions or communities from where they represent. So that appears with a long vision in sight. That can be one explanation for the many new faces inducted in the ministers of state rank. 28 of them are in minister of state rank, completely new faces.
And next we talk about a controversy that IIT Guwahati is embroiled in. A 4th-year PhD scholar at IIT Guwahati named Himanshul Singh has been made to sign an undertaking which says that if he wishes to resume his research program on campus, then he cannot participate in any form of agitation, protest or dharna. In this segment, Ritika Chopra, who reports on educational institutions for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about this controversy. And she starts by explaining what led IIT Guwahati to make Himanshul take this pledge.
So let me quickly give our listeners some background. Last year, on the 1st of January, an assistant professor in the Department of Electronics and Electrical Engineering, Brajesh Rai, the institute basically imposed a penalty on him and forced him to take compulsory retirement from the institute. Brajesh Rai had been accusing the administration of corruption. He had filed several RTI applications with the institute. He was basically charged with improper conduct and defaming the institute with false information. And he was trying to highlight corruption in the institute. The institute eventually said that Rai is trying to defame IIT Guwahati and he had to compulsorily retire. So 2 students, the story that we did recently was on one of them. His name is Himanshul Singh. So he, along with another fellow student, they sat on a 3-day hunger strike in the month of January, the same month when Brajesh Rai was compulsorily retired. And they basically sat on hunger strike to express their solidarity with Rai, who they felt was being victimized by the institution.
And how did the institution react to them protesting?
So what actually happened after that is that the institution then initiated disciplinary proceedings against both the students. And a student disciplinary committee, which is essentially largely has faculty members on this committee. It's a 10-member committee, but has 9 members from the faculty and 1 student representative. This committee felt that both the students, Himanshul and his fellow student, that they basically posted false information on social media. They tried to defame the institution, same accusation, the same charge they'd made against Brajesh Rai, and they imposed what's known as suspended academic expulsion for 1 year. What we mean by suspended academic expulsion is that this expulsion will kick in whenever the institution wants. So it doesn't kick in with immediate effect. Whenever the institution, for instance, would tell you that this happened. So this decision came in the month of March. And so the institution say we'll suspend you for one semester starting from, I don't know, July. But what happened immediately after this is that all education institutions started closing down because of the pandemic and students went back home. So Himanchal also went back home. And from that point, what started was that he went back home. He lives in a village in UP. And since he had trouble pursuing research back home, he started writing to the institution, asking for permission to come back to the campus. And for almost a year, he kept writing, and he claims that except for one, all his emails went unanswered. And eventually, this year in February, again, when an email was sent out to all research students inviting them back, he wrote to them that he's coming back along with his COVID negative report. He landed in IIT Guwahati in March this year, but within 24 hours of reaching his hostel, the authorities came over and forced him to vacate his room. And 4 days after that, the registrar handed him a letter saying that if you want to come back to the campus to resume your research activities, you will have to sign an undertaking. It was a 6-point undertaking. The bit that made news, or the shocking bit, was that at least 2 points state that Himanchal will not participate in any protest or agitation either on campus or off campus, and he will not mobilize students for the same. And if he is found violating any one of those 6 points, that his studentship at IIT Guwahati will be terminated without any further notice.
Right, and this is exactly what happens. He was made to sign this. And you reached out to the institute. What did they have to say about this?
So, what we do know from the documents that we have is that the Senate, while discussing Himanchal's case, felt that unlike his fellow student, along with whom he sat on a hunger strike, they felt that Himanchal never on his own has instigated students against the institution. And the minutes of the Senate meeting do not really make any direct reference to Brajesh Rai's case. It just talks about the fact that how, it's important for research scholars to focus on research and not on such frivolous activities. And if research scholars start sitting on dharnas, whatever, then, when are they going to actually pursue their research? So it talks about that. And the Senate members seem to, the only way to discourage the PhD scholar from protesting in future would be to get him to sign an undertaking. And if he doesn't, then they just threaten him with termination. So that was a decision that was eventually made. And what we can gather from the Senate minutes is that the logic given was that research scholars should focus on their research and not on such activities, which actually distract them from their research.
And I suppose this is similar to the arguments that we have seen other institutions make, right, when they discourage students from participating in protests and agitations.
Yes. What we've seen is in the last few years, student activism has acquired some kind of a bad reputation. It wasn't really looked down upon the way it is now. And the institutions seem to be adopting a harder line against student activism. Having said that, I do want to mention that at least the IITs don't, unlike the central universities, you don't really, at least in an IIT, find a lot of students rallying around a cause and protesting. It doesn't happen. So I guess the IITs or the IIT administration possibly is not used to being provoked. And maybe, I don't know if it's true for all IITs, but it seems that in this case, they were possibly provoked, and this is how they reacted to that provocation.
And also, how rare is it for any institution in India to sort of make a student take a pledge saying that we don't want you to participate in any protests, otherwise you will not be able to be in the university or, complete a program?
So I don't know how common or rare it is, frankly, given that there are so many private institutions, but there have been instances in the past. For instance, we remember right after the Pulwama attack, there were a few Kashmiri students who were studying in a private nursing college in Bangalore. And they had put up some Facebook posts and they were charged with sedition, and all 3 students end up spending about 6 to 7 months in jail. I remember, one of the conditions imposed on those students by the college was that they had to sign an undertaking. And actually, from that point onwards, the nursing college started asking all their fresh students, as in the fresh batch that was admitted the subsequent year, to sign an undertaking saying that they will not participate in protests or indulge in any activities which would defame the country or something to that effect, that they won't be indulging in any anti-national activities. So the short answer to your question is that it happens. We have seen this happening in the past. But every time, whenever a case has been highlighted in the media, institutions have got flack for this. So I will not say what happened in IIT Guwahati is unprecedented, but yes, it's really uncommon for it to happen in an IIT.
So now Himanshal Singh obviously has been made to sign this undertaking, but from what we know, he did take some action against the institute. Could you talk about what that was?
So as I mentioned earlier, he landed in IIT Guwahati in the first week of March this year after spending almost a year at home. And when he finally got here, as I mentioned, he was forced to vacate his hostel room. And then when he eventually got this letter from the institute registrar, which required him to actually sign an undertaking to come back, what Himanshal eventually did was that he approached the Guwahati High Court and said that this undertaking that I'm being asked to sign is unconstitutional and it violates my rights under Article 19. I mean, my right of freedom of expression and speech. And it's also discriminatory because it's just me. Just asked one student to sign this undertaking, as opposed to so many of my friends or other research students who've all come back to the campus and no one has been asked to sign a similar undertaking. So he had approached the Guwahati High Court, and his plea basically to the Guwahati High Court was to quash this order of the Senate based on which he was issued this letter. And the argument he made was that I'm being accused of defaming the institute. I'm being accused of defaming the institute through certain social media posts. He said, look, I don't even know what this is all about. I've never been given an opportunity to defend myself. I don't know what these charges are about. And I should also be given a copy of the Senate order or the proceedings of the Senate, which would at least give me an idea as to why and on what basis has the Senate decided to impose this punishment on me. What the Guwahati High Court eventually did was, while his plea was to quash the order, they said that institute should give Himanshal a copy of the Senate order. And if Himanshal still feels aggrieved after reading this, he can come back to us. What we understand from our sources, we tried reaching out to Himanshal and he didn't want to discuss the matter. But we understand from our sources that he gave up because he'd already lost a year and he tried really hard to come back to the campus and he couldn't, and he'd lost a year of his research. He's a fourth-year student. And so, which is why he didn't want to pursue this any further. And he just wanted to get back to his research work. So he eventually relented. I mean, frankly, he didn't really have an option, is what our sources told us, that he wasn't left with much. Either he could continue pursuing this in the court, but frankly, he felt mentally tortured by the whole process itself was punishment. I mean, that year wasn't that great for him. So he decided to sign the undertaking.
And in the end, we talk about the Zika virus. A case of Zika virus has been reported for the first time in Kerala. Samples of 13 persons suspected to be positive for Zika have been sent to the National Institute of Virology in Pune for confirmation. The first confirmed case of the virus was contracted by a 24-year-old pregnant woman. The woman sought treatment at a private hospital after having symptoms of fever, headache, and red spots. The woman, however, is now stable and has delivered the baby. Zika is a viral infection and is transmitted by the Aedes aegypti mosquito. This is the same mosquito that also spreads dengue and chikungunya. Those infected by the Zika virus can also transmit it sexually. Generally, the virus is not considered dangerous for anyone except pregnant women. Though some countries that have had Zika outbreaks, including Brazil, have reported a steep increase in the Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurological disorder that could lead to paralysis and death, according to WHO. In 2018, 80 cases of the Zika virus were detected in Jaipur. This was India's first large outbreak of the virus. You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.